Hey there, Pages of Darkness fans. Sorry we didn't release an episode last fortnight, I was terribly ill. I've made a full recovery this week, and I've got a brand new episode for you called The Hatman. Some of you may have experienced this entity over your life, usually during the moments between deep sleep and being awake. I'm going to give you a story straight out of the Pages of Darkness about a young boy who experiences this entity while wide awake, and the consequences that follow of such a meeting. Stay with me as I read this to you straight out of the book that you all know and love, The Pages of Darkness. Thanks, guys. I still can't look in dark corners of a room, because if I say that demonic silhouette, it means it all really happened and wasn't the result of an overactive nightmare-fueled imagination. Hi, I'm Wesley Peterson, and I want to tell you about the time I came face to face with what my grandmother called the Hatman. It all started when I was around age 9. It was a beautiful spring day in Leverton. The air smelled like fresh cut grass, blooming flowers, and the afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across our quiet little home. I spent most of my days outside running around with my little sister Ellie, or getting lost in our own little adventures. Pirate battles in the backyard, treasure hunts in the woods behind our house. Mum always said I had the wildest imagination. That day, though, everything felt different. Not because of the weather or anything. I couldn't explain. Just a weird sort of feeling in my stomach, like something was about to change. And I was right. That was the day my grandmother came to stay with us. I remember the call my mother got as I darted around the house trying to find bits of missing Hot Wheels track.
Mum, have you seen my...
My mother silenced me with a finger to her lips. She pointed at the phone in her hand. My mother was a woman of little patience, especially when talking on the phone. I tiptoed around the next wall of the house and imagined I was a spy listening in on a top-secret conversation. Unfortunately, all I found out was that my grandmother was coming to stay, which meant me or Elle were going to have to be given up a room. I sighed in disappointment, but then quickly got distracted by my favourite TV show playing in the next room. The rest of that day passed in a blur of cartoons, snack breaks and half-finished games. I didn't think much about my grandmother coming to stay. She visited often enough, and it usually just meant having to be a little quieter around the house. No big deal. It wasn't until later, during dinner, that reality started to set in.
We'll be picking Grandma up tomorrow morning,
Mum said, scooping mashed potatoes into Ellie's plate.
She's not feeling well, so she'll be staying with us for a while. I need you two to behave and help out where you can.
Ellie groaned. Does that mean I have to share my room? Mum's eyes flickered to me and then back to Ellie.
Yes, Ellie. You and Wesley will have to share for now. One of you can sleep on the floor if you...
I'll call the bed, Ellie cut in quickly. I frowned.
No fair, I don't want to sleep on the floor.
Mum sighed, rubbing her temple.
Fine. You'll sleep head to toe. End of discussion.
I didn't argue, but something about it made my stomach twist. I didn't know why. Maybe it was just the thought of Ellie kicking me in her sleep. Maybe it was something else. Either way, I had no idea that tomorrow night would change everything. That night, I got as cozy as I could in my bed. I mean, who knew how long Grandma would be staying? And I wanted to savour this night. I remember dreaming vividly about becoming a king, the king of Candy City in fact, and I ruled with my chocolate scepter. But then the city's alarm went off, as everything started melting around me. Suddenly an earthquake hit the city, and then My sister was shaking me with an alarm in her hand that was going off in a similar fashion as my dream. "Wake up, you annoying little brat," she screamed. "Mum's got breakfast ready." Ellie bolted out of the room, her steps echoing down the hallway as she ran towards the smell of eggs and bacon wafting through the house. I groaned, rubbing my eyes. As my dream faded away, 1 second I was a mighty king ruling over the mountains of marshmallows and the rivers of caramel, and the next, I was just Wesley Peterson, tangled up in my blankets with a pillow halfway off the bed. I stretched, taking a deep breath. The air still carried the scent of sleep, stale and warm, but beneath it was something better: bacon. My stomach grumbled, and I swung my legs over the side of the bed, barely remembering to turn off Ellie's obnoxious alarm before shuffling to the door. The house was alive with the usual morning chaos, dishes clanking, the TV murmuring from the living room, and Mum's voice cutting through it all.
Ellie, slow down before you choke.
I stepped into the kitchen, blinking against the bright morning sun streaming through the window. My mother stood above her stove, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, flipping eggs with a precision only she could manage. Ellie was already at the table, stuffing her face like she hadn't eaten in days. Mum glanced at me.
About time. Sit down.
I slid into my chair, grabbing a piece of bacon, before my mum smacked my hand away with the spatula. "Wait for your plate," she said, but there was no real bite in her voice. As I waited, I glanced at the empty chair across from me, Grandma's chair. She'd be sitting there tomorrow morning. I still didn't know why that made me uneasy. As I started eating, my father came into the room dressed in blue grubby overalls, and his hair was slicked back. He frantically gave everyone a kiss goodbye, said "I love you," and was out the door. He wasn't a fan of my grandmother, so today he was leaving to go to work early to avoid the nicety of having the type of conversation you have with a person you're close to, especially one you haven't seen in a while, especially one you don't get along with. Like, "What's new? How's your life been?" You know, those kinds of conversations. Yep. He just didn't care for it. Or for her, for that matter.
Love you, Dad.
I shouted as the door shut on my own words. Mum sighed, shaking her head as she scooped the eggs onto my plate.
Your father could at least pretend.
She muttered, mostly to herself. I didn't say anything. I didn't really get it, why he didn't like Grandma. She was just old. A little strict sometimes, sure, but not bad. Not like some of the scary grandmas in movies who had weird collections of dolls or whispered about ghosts. Grandma just sat in a recliner, watched TV, told stories about the good old days, and that just sounded way less fun than the cartoons I watched anyways.
She's sick, Wesley.
Mum added, pointing the spatula at me.
That means no running around the house like a lunatic, and if she needs anything, you help her.
I nodded through a mouthful of bacon. Ellie kicked me under the table. "You're gonna be a favourite, you know." I swallowed.
What's that supposed to mean?
Ellie smirked. "You act like a little kid. Grandma likes little kids. She'll probably tell you all her weird, creepy stories." I frowned.
She doesn't tell creepy stories.
Ellie just shrugged and went back to eating. I didn't know it then, but she was actually kinda right. Maybe I was just too young to hear those kind of stories around Grandma. Later that day, we all hopped into Mum's car and drove towards St. Adrian's Medical Centre to pick up Grandma. The car drove slowly around a crescent and stopped outside the hospital where Grandma sat waiting in a patient pickup zone. There she was, my grandmother, the toughest woman I knew besides my own mum. Unfortunately, now she had to be assisted to move, as a hospital nurse helped her towards the car. Mum turned, looking over her shoulder at me and Ellie.
Come on. Get out and help me gather Grandma's things and put them in the car.
I opened my car door and got out and grabbed 2 of Grandma's bags. One of them seemed to be filled with a magazine, some yarn, and a half-finished crochet project sitting on top. The other was a thick black bag that I struggled to lift. After we loaded the bags, I noticed Grandma was now in the car as I got in myself. Her head leant against the window, and I wanted to ask her some questions, or at least say hi, but then I remembered my mother told me not to bother her. The ride home was awkwardly quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the occasional click of the blinker, and the muffled chatter of a radio show that Mum had turned down so low it was barely more than a whisper. Ellie fidgeted beside me, kicking her feet against the seat. I stared out the window, watching the town roll by. It felt weird seeing Grandma like this, quiet, small. I was used to her being a force of nature, always talking, always busy with something. But now, she just sat there, eyes half closed, her breath fogging up the glass. I glanced at the thick black bag we had loaded into the trunk. I had no idea what was in it, but I'd never seen her carry it before. It was heavy, heavier than I thought an old bags lady should be anyways. I wanted to ask about it. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there counting the streetlights as we passed.
1, 2, 3.
I lost track when I saw Grandma's reflection in the window just for a second. I thought she was looking at me. Not just looking, staring. But when I blinked, her eyes were closed again. After a rather long, uneventful and boring day of being quiet and helping Mum organise Grandma's stuff, night had rolled around and Grandma was sleeping like a baby in Ellie's room. That night, Mum got distracted with everything. She forgot about dinner and we ate what we called whatevers, which meant whatever you could find to eat, that's what you were having. I tucked into a curried egg sandwich. It was so good I almost felt tired immediately. Ellie sat across from me munching on a bowl of dry cereal, her feet swinging under the table. "Bet you can't stay up past midnight," she challenged between bites. I smirked.
Bet you I can.
"Bet you can't," she shot back. We both knew neither of us would last. It was just one of those pointless bets siblings made just to have something to argue about. Still, I played along, stuffing the rest of my sandwich in my mouth and stretching with an exaggerated yawn.
Guess we'll see,
I mumbled, already feeling my eyelids droop. Mum walked away by ruffling my hair.
Bed now.
Ellie groaned, but we didn't argue. We trudged to my room where the single bed waited for us both. I climbed in first, claiming my side, while Ellie flopped down next to me, making the mattress bounce. We laid head to toe, just like Mum said, and after some half-hearted bickering about foot space, the room fell silent. The house felt different that night. Maybe it was just having Grandma here, or maybe it was the kind of quiet that settles in just before something bad happens. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I do know when I woke up. My eyes shot open at first. I thought I was dreaming. I was in my room, but there was this red glow on the walls that kept flashing off and on. Then there was this weird sound. A gurgling, mixed with a scraping, filled the room. I took a breath of relief when my senses finally kicked in. There must have been a blackout overnight, and now my clock radio was set back to 00 hours, causing it to flash, illuminating the walls. I turned to face it to affirm my thoughts, but as my eyes crossed to near the set of drawers at the end of my bed where I sat, I froze in horror. The silhouette of a tall man wearing a wide-brimmed cowboy hat and a long overcoat stood at the end of my bed, hovering over Ellie and blocking the view of the flashing clock. The red light highlighted his shadow as it turned off and on. It looked like he was choking Ellie. Then his gaze turned, locking onto me. I threw the bed cover over my head, too scared, too helpless to do anything. I just hoped it went away and left me and Ellie alone. Suddenly the sound stopped, and I heard Ellie breathe normally again. But I didn't dare lift that cover off my head, as if it was some kind of shield. Somehow, I fell asleep again, and later awoke to Mum calling me and Ellie to breakfast. For a second, I thought it had all been a dream. Morning sunlight poured through the window, golden and warm, pushing away the night's terror like it had never existed. Ellie was already gone, probably in the kitchen, inhaling whatever Mum had made. I sat up slowly, glancing at the end of my bed where he had stood. Nothing. Just my dresser. my blinking alarm clock still flashing from the power outage. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe it had been in my dream. Maybe my brain had played a trick on me, mixing shadows and half sleep into something terrifying. But then I saw Ellie's pillow. It was on the floor like it had been knocked away. I swallowed hard.
Kids! I'm not yelling a third time.
I hesitated, staring at the spot where he had been. Then I shook my head and scrambled out of bed. Dream or not, I wasn't about to be late for breakfast. I sat across from Ellie, who wasn't her usual lively self.
You okay?
I asked. Mum interrupted.
Your sister has a sore throat and doesn't feel like talking. Judging by the marks on her neck, I'd say you must have kicked her pretty hard in the throat last night.
No way, I thought. This is way too coincidental to not be real.
But it wasn't me. It was...
Oh, who was it then? The boogeyman? Perhaps Caspar?
Mum interrupted, but I answered in defiance.
Yeah, kind of, but he was a cowboy.
Ellie snorted at my response, and Mum responded with an eyebrow raised.
That's some imagination you got there, Wesley.
I wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't my imagination, but I could already hear the disbelief in her voice, the way she was ready to dismiss it like some silly dream. Maybe if Ellie backed me up, maybe if she said she saw him too, Mum would listen. I turned to my sister. Ellie just rolled her eyes and shook her head. Whatever, weirdo, she muttered, wincing as she touched her throat. That was it. That was all she said. I felt my face heat up. How could she not remember? How could she just sit there acting like nothing happened? Maybe she didn't remember. Maybe it, had done something to make her forget. I swallowed hard, suddenly not so hungry anymore. Mum sighed, already moving on.
Eat up, the both of you. Grandma's still sleeping, so I don't want you making a racket. And Wesley, no more wild stories, okay?
I nodded absently, staring at my plate. I didn't know what was scarier, that the Hatman had been real, or that I might have been the only one that knew it. After Dad had rushed out the door again, avoiding Grandma before she woke up, I spent the day playing with a few Matchbox cars and track building pieces in my room, when the flashing clock caught my attention. I remembered the eerie off and on glow it had given to the room last night, and I rushed over to unplug it from the wall, seeing as I had no idea how to set it, because Dad would usually do that for me. I breathed a sigh of relief, like I had just solved the problem, but in reality, I knew. Now at night, it would be completely dark. I decided then and there that when night came around, I would do whatever I could to keep Ellie awake with me by any means necessary. The rest of the day crawled by. My mind split between usual games and the nagging fear of what would happen when I fell asleep again. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe Mum was right. Maybe I did have an overreactive imagination. But every time I glanced at Ellie's throat, the faint marks still visible on her skin, my stomach twisted. Even if she didn't remember, I certainly did. Even if Mum didn't believe me, I knew what I saw. As the sun started to set, I put my plan into action. Ellie had been flipping through a magazine on the couch when I plopped down beside her.
Hey,
I said casually.
do you want to stay up all night?
She didn't even look up. Why?
Because it will be fun.
I lied.
We can play games, tell scary stories.
I hate your scary stories. I grinned.
Even the one about the headless clown.
She groaned. Go away, Wesley. I crossed my arms, thinking, if stories wouldn't work, maybe something else would.
Fine.
I said.
Then I dare you to stay up all night.
That got her attention. Ellie glanced at me, eyebrow raised. You dare me? I nodded.
Yep, unless you're too scared.
She scoffed. I'm not scared of anything, I smoked.
Guess we'll see about that.
Evening rolled on, and me and Ellie were having a competition who could eat the most dumplings. We were neck and neck, and it came down to the last dumpling, which Ellie swiped before I could, and shoved it into her mouth.
No fair, Mum. Ellie cheated.
I yelled. It's not cheating if I'm faster than him, Ellie yelled to Mum in response. Mum came rushing into the room with a very cross look on her face.
Why are you two yelling? Your grandmother needs all the rest she can.
Are you two ratbags giving your mother grief?
Grandma's muffled voice cut through the room. Me and Ellie turned and saw Grandma now standing on her walking frame in the entrance to the hallway. It was an odd sight to see her like that. Oxygen tank attached to her walking frame, her mask covering her nose and mouth, and a general weakness to her. Ellie shot up to hug her, but Mum quickly stopped her.
No, Ellie. Grandma isn't well. Just let her stretch her legs and leave her be.
Mum said softly. Okay, Mum. Love you, Grandma, Ellie said, putting her head down. Grandma's muffled voice came back.
I love you too, sweetie.
But then Grandma started coughing and wheezing before slowly returning to Ellie's bedroom with Mum's help. I watched as Mum guided Grandma back down the hall, her steps slow, her breath wheezing through the oxygen mask. Something about seeing her like that sent a strange shiver through me. Grandma was tough. She was the kind of woman who used to lift big bags of soil for her garden without breaking a sweat. Who once told off a stranger in the shops for cutting in line like she was the sheriff in an old western? But now, she looked so small. I glanced at Ellie, expecting her to just be as weirded out as I was, but she was already distracted, flipping through the TV commercials. For a second, I thought about telling her again, about the Hatman, about what I saw, but if she didn't believe me this morning, she definitely wouldn't believe me now. And besides, I had a bigger plan to focus on. The night was not over yet. After brushing our teeth and putting on pajamas, there we were, laying down head to toe. And Ellie was already starting to yawn. I tried to think of conversation material to keep Ellie awake, but it was getting to the point that every time I spoke, I was jolting her back awake. Before I knew it too long, she would be asleep, and I would be left alone in the dark.
Ellie, do you think dinosaurs will ever be cloned?
I asked, running out of things to say with that silhouette in my mind. Ellie didn't respond. I nudged her with my foot.
Ellie!
I kinda yelled and whispered, sort of. Still no response. That's when I heard the horrifying gasping sound again. I lifted my head to look in the direction of the sound. Barely lit by the moonlight pouring in the window was that same silhouette from the night before, looming over Ellie. My whole body locked up. I wanted to scream, to shake Ellie awake, to do something. Anything. But fear gripped me so tightly that it felt like it was choking. He stood there, his long coat shifting slightly like it was caught in a breeze. His wide brim hat cast an even deeper shadow over his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Ellie's gasping turned into a strained whimper, her body twitching like she was trying to wake up but couldn't. This wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't my imagination. And this time, I wasn't just going to hide under the covers. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I did the only thing I could think of. I kicked my foot out hard, my foot slamming right into the side of Ellie. She jolted awake with a sharp gasp, clutching her throat and coughing. The moment she moved, he snapped his head towards me, and for the briefest second I saw a flicker of his face in the dim light. And then, he was gone. No slow fade, no stepping back into the shadows, just gone, like he was never even there. Ellie groaned, rubbing her ribs. Ow! What the heck, Wesley? But I wasn't listening. I was staring into the empty space where the man in the hat had just been, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew now. He wasn't just some shadow. He was real, and he was coming back. Ellie fell back asleep minutes later, but I surely couldn't. I just stared at the spot that I'd last seen it for what felt like hours, before I couldn't fight the urge to close my eyes anymore, and eventually drifted off. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and shot out of bed. Pancakes were my favourite, and still are. But when I got to the table, everything was different. Firstly, Ellie was always up before me, but she wasn't here at the table waiting for breakfast. Secondly, Grandma was now sitting at the table with no oxygen mask in sight.
Where's your sister?
Grandma asked. I shrugged.
Maybe she's still in bed. I'll go check.
I said as I spun around to head back to my room. When I got there, I found Ellie still asleep, covers jacked up over her head.
Ellie, breakfast will be ready soon and Grandma is up and about.
I said softly, trying to wake her. Well, that didn't work, I thought to myself. So I decided to pull down the covers, and that's when I saw Ellie's neck. The marks had gotten darker and longer, as they seemed to stretch right around her neck. Then she opened her eyes, and in a groan and rush, she said, 10 more minutes, and pulled the cover back over her head. That's when I heard Grandma say loudly,
You smell like burnt hair.
The front door slammed. I guess Dad was out for the day again, avoiding Grandma's criticism. I came back to the dining room and poked my head into the kitchen. Mum was there cooking away.
Mum, I think Ellie's neck has gotten worse.
I said nervously.
She doesn't want to get up for breakfast.
Mum let out a tired sigh and flipped a pancake before turning to face me.
I'll check on her after breakfast. She probably just slept funny.
I frowned. Slept funny? That didn't explain the way the marks had darkened. It didn't explain the way Ellie's voice rasped like she'd been screaming all night. And it definitely didn't explain what I saw standing over her. Grandma stirred her tea slowly, watching me from across the table.
Boy is worried.
She muttered, mostly to herself.
Ain't just a bad sleep, is it, Wesley?
I hesitated. Mum didn't believe me, and Ellie would probably just laugh at me again. But Grandma? Something about the way she was looking at me made me feel like maybe, just maybe, she would. Before I could say anything, Mum walked in with a plate of pancakes.
No spooky stories at the table, please, Mum.
She said flatly.
I don't need Wesley having nightmares.
Grandma didn't break eye contact with me as she took a slow sip of her tea.
Oh, I reckon his nightmares are already here.
Chill crawled down my spine. She knew. But before I could ask her how, Mum changed the subject, and the moment passed. I forced myself to eat, but my appetite wasn't really there anymore. My head was spinning with thoughts, with fears, with one horrible question. What if tonight's even worse? Ellie came out of the room a few hours later, dragging her feet as she walked. Mum and Grandma were watching some program on TV.
Morning, sleepyhead. I was about to come in and wake you. Are you hungry, honey?
Ellie tried to answer, but she seemed to strain. She just looked and nodded instead. As her head nodded, Grandma and Mum saw the marks on Ellie's neck.
Oh, what the hell, Wesley? Ellie, are you okay, sweetie?
Mum said, rushing to the couch to get a closer look. Ellie strained and let out a very low, raspy voice. It wasn't Wesley, Mum. It was a cowboy. Ellie's voice cut off from the strain, and Grandma seemed to sit forward to Ellie. Mum frowned.
Seriously, I've heard enough of this stupid ghost cowboy. You two and your stupid games are clearly getting people hurt. I don't want to have to tell you again. Is that clear?
Mum demanded. I tried to defend myself and Ellie.
But, Mum,
I said, am I clear?
Mum yelled, cutting me off. I put my head down.
Yes, Mum.
Ellie looked equally defeated as she sat next to Grandma, and then I saw Mum disappear into the kitchen. Grandma then leaned in close and whispered to me.
I know what's attacking your sister, Wesley. I'll talk to you about it tonight when your mother is out doing shopping.
The rest of the day crawled by. Mum was still upset. Ellie barely spoke, and Grandma didn't say another word about what she knew. I kept thinking about what she'd whispered to me. She knows. That meant this wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't just some bad dream or a trick of the shadows. Something was really in our room at night, and it was hurting Ellie. Mum left for the shops just after dinner with Dad. As soon as the front door shut, Grandma turned off the TV and gestured for me to sit beside her. Ellie was already half asleep on the couch, so it was just us. She took a long breath and then asked in a hushed tone,
Tell me everything that's happened so far, Wesley.
I laid out to Grandma what happened in the last 2 nights, about how the Hatman showed up when she did, how it appeared late at night, and how I had to wake Ellie so she could breathe again. Grandma cuddled me to her side. It made me feel a bit safer.
There's an old story, Wesley, a real old one, about a man with a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, some folks say. Others called him the Rider or the Hatman.
I swallowed hard.
The Hatman?
That name made my stomach twist. Grandma continued.
He don't ride a horse, though. No. He walks right into the rooms of children who are just drifting off to sleep. And once he sets his sights on you, you become paralysed by his power.
I felt cold all over.
What does he want?
Grandma's face darkened.
He wants breath, Wesley, and he wants life.
I turned to Ellie, still tired watching TV, barely not even aware of the conversation that we're having on the couch, her chest rising and falling weakly. It was stealing her breath. I gripped the couch, my mind racing.
How do we stop him?
Grandma exhaled.
There's ways, but they ain't easy. And they sure ain't fun. Plus, I lack the ability to stop it. How do you think your old grandma ended up in the hospital?
Grandma's face was as serious as a heart attack.
It tried to steal my breath when I was young. That's why my lungs are so bad now. I'm afraid your mum won't listen. You're going to have to be the one to stop it.
Grandma leaned in close to my ear.
Wesley, from what you told me, you have more power than it does. The Hatman has not been able to paralyse you along with your sister, giving you the advantage.
Give me the advantage to do what?
I asked.
To confront him,
She said. Grandma's words hit hard. I mean, how was I, such a young small boy, meant to confront a ghost in the dark? Grandma continued.
The Hatman is scared of children, but they also hold the most life in their breaths. So he comes for them while they sleep, paralysing them as they drift off. You can scare him off for good, Wesley. Just like my brother did for me when I was younger. He saved my life, he did.
I stared at Grandma, my heart pounding. She'd seen him too. She wasn't just telling me a story. This was real.
But how did your brother stop him?
I asked. My hands were gripping my knees, waiting for the answer that I could possibly save Ellie. Grandma sighed, like she was remembering something painful.
He stayed awake, just like you have. And when the Hatman came for me, my brother faced him. He didn't hide. He didn't scream. He stood his ground and told him to leave. Said he wasn't welcome here. Said he wasn't afraid.
I felt a lump in my throat.
And it worked?
Grandma nodded.
He took everything he had. But yes, the Hatman feeds on fear. Wesley, the more scared you are, the stronger he gets. If you stand up to him, he is the one who gets scared. He's nothing but a shadow, and shadows can't survive the light.
I swallowed hard.
So I just tell him to leave?
Grandma's face turned serious.
Not just tell. You have to mean it. You have to believe it. And when you do, he'll know.
I looked at Ellie, still curled up under a blanket. The bruises on her neck were even darker now. I clenched my fists. I had to do this tonight. Hours later, there I was lying in bed with Ellie's feet at my head once more. I could hear Mum and Dad saying goodnight to each other down the hall. Then the dim light pouring in my room disappeared as they turned out their light. I whispered.
Hey Ellie, are you awake?
Ellie replied, barely awake and straining to speak. Yeah, Wesley, but I'm tired. I don't think I can stay up with you tonight. Sorry. I replied softly.
That's okay, Ellie. You go to sleep. Your little brother will protect you.
She gave a slight laugh. You're too cute sometimes, you know that. Then she yawned and snuggled into a pillow. I stayed awake listening to Ellie's breathing slow as she drifted off. My stomach was in knots, but I knew what I had to do. Minutes felt like hours. The house was dead silent. Then it started. The air in the room felt heavier, like something invisible had pushed down on my chest. A gurgling, scraping sound crept into my ears. My breath hitched. The moonlight barely lit the room, but I didn't need to see clearly. I felt him. The Hatman. Standing at the end of the bed, towering over Ellie. The red glow of the alarm clock, now unplugged, flickered for a split second, just long enough to catch his silhouette, his wide-brim hat, his long overcoat, his hands, reaching for Ellie's throat. I sat up, my whole body shaking, but I clenched my fists.
Leave her alone,
I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The Hatman didn't move. I swallowed.
You're not welcome here.
Still nothing. A deep, unnatural growl filled the room. I took a deep breath. I have more power than he does. I thought of Grandma's words, thought of her brother saving her. I threw the blanket off me and stood on the bed.
I said leave her alone.
The growling turned into a hiss. The shadow loomed taller, but I didn't back down.
You don't scare me.
I said, even though my heart was pounding.
You're just the shadows. Shadows can't survive the light.
The Hatman's head snapped towards me. My skin crawled, but I didn't look away. Then something changed. His form flickered, just for a second, like a glitch on an old TV. I took a step forward.
Get out!
The moment the words left my mouth, the room cracked with a deafening silence. The air shifted, and just like that, he was gone. Or so I thought. The red flicker began again, this time more rapidly. Some of my toys in the room began to turn on. The door slammed shut and the room began to shake. A vortex of shadows began swirling around in the center of my bedroom floor, and a cold wind howled through, seemingly from nowhere. I turned to Ellie, who was frozen still, eyes wide open, her mouth desperately trying to take in air. I moved to her side and shook her violently, yelling her name, doing anything I could to snap her out of it, but everything I tried wouldn't work. The swirling shadows then somehow absorbed the flickering light from the clock. The red light came, forming together as two glowing orbs, and the shadow of the Hatman appeared in the swirl of the shadows, ascending from the floor. The red flickering orbs then landed right on the Hatman's face, becoming his eyes, staring through me as his hand stretched towards Ellie. Suddenly, I heard my dad and mum banging on the outside of the door, confused as to why the door wouldn't open. Whatever you two are up to, better cut it out.
And open this door now.
I curled into a ball, holding Ellie's hand. Who was I kidding? I couldn't save Ellie, but then I heard Grandma tell my mum and dad to go to bed. She'll handle us kids. I could see Hatman now, right on top of Ellie. Shadows enveloped her neck as his face went right up close to hers, and a shadowy gas-like substance began to shoot out of his mouth into Ellie's. Mum and Dad reluctantly agreed with Grandma, and then several moments later, Grandma said a couple of stern but quiet lines through the wood of the door.
Hatman, you are not welcome in this house. You never were, and you never will be. Now leave my damn grandkids alone.
The moment Grandma's words cut through the room, everything shifted. The vortex of shadows around the Hatman shuddered, like ink swirling in water. The red glow of his eyes flickered, but he didn't disappear. Instead, his head snapped towards the door where Grandma stood outside. A long rattling breath escaped him, almost like a laugh. The shadows around Ellie tightened. Grandma's voice came again, sharper this time.
I said leave!
Suddenly the room was flooded with a smell of burnt hair, thick and suffocating. The cold wind twisted, blistering hot. The Hatman's form twisted unnaturally, writhing like something was yanking him backward. His shadowy fingers clawed at Ellie, desperate to hold on. I couldn't take it anymore. With all the courage I had left, I lunged forward and wrapped my arms around Ellie.
Let her go!
I screamed. A deafening crack echoed through the room, like thunder splitting the sky. The red orbs in the Hatman's face flared impossibly bright. Then, darkness. Silence. The room was still. The air was warm again, and the smell was gone. Ellie gasped, sucking in air like she'd been drowning. I held onto her, feeling her small body shake against mine. The bedroom door creaked open. Grandma stood in the hallway, her face shadowed by the dim hall light.
"He won't be back,"
she said, and I believed her. The next morning, Ellie was up before me, once again, and then shook me awake. "Wake up, brat," she said with a raspy voice. "Breakfast is ready." And weirdly enough, Dad and Grandma are getting along. Well, stranger things have happened, I thought to myself. As I joined everyone for breakfast, Grandma shot me a smile, and so did Ellie, the marks on her neck seemingly already healing fast.
So how did you get the kids to settle last night, Mum?
My mum asked Grandma.
"'Cause I'm a tough old cowgirl,"
she said proudly. That was the Grandma I knew. Well now, that story really had me hooked in, especially because I've had my own experiences with this Hatman. There's no lesson really here to be taken away from this story, other than if you start to feel yourself struggling and gasping for air while you're asleep, maybe it's best to just stay awake for the night. Consider bunking up with somebody else. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, leave a like, share, and subscribe. But for now, I'm going to go and get some hard-earned rest, possibly some shut-eye. Thanks guys, thanks for watching.